Hello everyone, welcome back. Today what we will be discussing is known as living standard. What do we mean by the living standard? Let us move to our slide. Now first slide we have the definition for living standard or standard of living. Standard of living refers to all the factors that contribute to a what? To a person's well-being and happiness. As you can see here, we have a picture showing an healthcare, life expectancy, infrastructure, and a lot of factors that contribute to human being, well-being, and happiness. We move to the next slide. What do we have here? We have the indicators of living standards. What are the indicators of living standard? That is the measure. What are we using when measuring the living standard of an individual? Here we have the gross domestic product and we have the human development index, but we have to drag the word into the correct boxes here. We have the real GDP per head or per capita, that is our gross domestic product, and we also have human development index as one of the measure of standard of living. Now, if you move to our gross domestic product, it is used to measure the average income per person in an economy, and it is calculated by real GDP divided by the population in the country. And we also have the human development index, that one is used to measure the living standard that takes into account the income, the education, and the life expectancy. Now let us check. Wow, we are good to go. Now let us move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we have one past question where we related to what we just did now. Which components, in addition to gross domestic product per head, are included in the human development index? We said earlier that human development index include income, life expectancy, etc. and so on. Now let us check out the options here. We have average earning and inequality of income. Is that so? Balance of trade and balance of payment, size of population and age structure of population, life expectancy as birth and expected years of schooling. Of course, HDI is dealing with life expectancy and expected year of schooling here. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the advantages of using GDP per capita to measure standard of living. Remember we said that our GDP per capita measure the average income per person in an economy. Now let us now choose the advantages here among these multiple choices. First one said it indicates the material well-being of what? Of well-being of the economy. Of course, GDP per capita indicates the material well-being of the economy. Now, two, it takes account of what people can buy using their income. Of course, no, it's just so it measure only the average income per person in an economy. It doesn't state if the amount to buy whatever with the income with. Now it takes population into consideration and adding emphasis on goods available to individual. Of course, it also takes population into consideration. It's a useful measure of the total population taking place in the country. Of course, yes. Now GDP is also readily available as population data. Of course, we said our GDP per capita measure the average income per person in an economy, that is the population of the number of people in an economy. Distribution of income is very equal in reality. Of course, no, GDP per capita doesn't distribute income. Let us check. We are good to go. Now let us move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the demerit of using GDP per capita to measure living standard. Here we have, it takes no account of what people can buy using it. I've said that earlier. Of course, a country with high GDP per head may no better off than a country with a low GDP per head. It doesn't consider change in technology that can have a large impact on living. Of course, it doesn't. Now we also have the distribution of income is very unequal in reality. Of course, GDP per head is not accurate most of the time, and it also excludes the unpaid work people for the charities and voluntary organization, because it only measures the average income per person in an economy. Now we move to the next slide. Move to the next slide. We also have one last question here related to the living standard question. Now we have which combination of changes is most likely to result in a fall in living standards in a country. Here we have the GDP, that is the gross domestic product, and we also have the inflation, the general rise in the price of level of goods and services, and we also have the population here. Now, what can be the combination of changes in the most country to help us to know when if there is a fall or a high in living standard? Of course, we're supposed to use the measure of living standard. If there is a fall in the GDP per capita, that is the living standard will also fall. Now let us check here in the option. We have here our GDP is 4, our inflation is 4 also, and our population is 5. That should not be our answer. Here we have the GDP, our GDP measure here also 4. We have our inflation to increase, and we have our population to rise. Of course, what can show us the fall in living standard is when our GDP fall and there is increase in the population and also a rise in inflation. Let us check. Of course, we got this. Let us move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the advantages of using Human Development Index to measure standard of living. As we have the advantages of using GDP per capita to measure living standard, we also have the advantage of using Human Development Index to measure living standard also. Now let us choose here. We also have multiple choice here. It is very useful and reliable measure since it is produced by the United Nations and is recognized. Of course, it is produced by United Nations. Now, it is a useful method to compare global living standard. Of course, it shows clear pattern of living standards. Compare global living standard. Now, it combines a set of separate indicators to one. Does it? No. Of course, it didn't. Now, it's taking into account some major indicators of living standard. Of course, it's taking into account some major indicators of living standard like income, life expectancy, and so on. Now, the HDI information for all country is available. Is that so? Of course, no. Doesn't. It is not available. Now we got it right. Let us move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, what do we have here? We have a past question. The Human Development Index rank human development in countries from 0, that is lowest, to 1, highest. What does the calculation of HDI not take into consideration? Remember when we are discussing Human Development Index, we said it takes into consideration our income, life expectancy, expected years, and other healthcare index, and so on. Now, here we have to choose the one that doesn't take into consideration. Now we have the information of the number of years of schooling, standard of living linked to income per head, estimate of life expectancy as birth, regional inequalities of investment in human capital. Of course, HDI take the number of years of schooling into action, standard of living linked to income. Of course, it deals with it. Life, of course, this is our correct answer. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the disadvantages of using Human Development Index to measure standard of living also. Now, the HDI information for all countries may not be available. Of course, I said that earlier. Short as it may not be available because World Stock Company West validation has been disrupted. Now, it doesn't consider other factors like environmental quality, crime rate, political freedom, yes, short as environmental quality, access to safe drinking water doesn't take those factors into consideration. There are wide divergences in HDI within what? Within countries, and it combines a set of separate indicators into one. That's true because living standard, the poor life expectancy can have a low HDI value. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have the reason for differences in living standard within and between country. Why do we have living standard within countries and between countries? Here we have war, crime, and natural disaster. Of course, war, crime, and natural disaster is one of the reasons why we have differences in living standard. Here we also have local government provision of education and health. Of course, that should also be the reason why we have living standard differences. We have the regional variances in income and what? And consumption. Regional differences in income and consumption is also part of the different why we have differences in living standard. Here we have love between countries. Is that why we have difference in living standard? No, that's not it. Productivities of industry, of course, productivity of different industry also differentiate living standard of many countries. Variety of goods and services produced, of course, if you can choose from a wide variety of good living standard will also increase. Corporations of government and people, of course, corporation of government and people cannot is not part of the difference in the living standard. Let us check. We got it. Now we move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we now have first question here. Which increases in the first indicator is most likely to lead to an increase in the second indicator? Now, what is our first indicators here, and what are our second indicators here? Here we have inflation here, and we have our second inflation to be. We have our second indicator to be what? Trade surplus. The second one, we have the productivity, which leads to an increase in living standard. And the third one, we have the consumer spending, which leads to an increase in unemployment, or the budget surplus leads to an increase in consumer saving. And our question here says, which increase in the first indicator is most likely to lead to an increase in the second indicator? Of course, an increase in productivity can lead to living standard. We move to the next slide. Moving to the next slide, we also have past question here related to the gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is a better measure of comparative living standards when it is adjusted for the effect of what? Now we have our GDP is calculating what? That is the income per capita of an individual. Now here we now have the population change and inflation, export and inflation, population change and export, import and export. Of course, it is adjusted for the population change and inflation. This will be the end of the class. Stay tuned to our website www.edubbey.com. See you in the next class.